In this section, we're going to continue on with LCL service and pricing model, talking a little bit more about the pricing side of things to begin, and also talk about the types of charges that can possibly be levied on an LCL shipment. Let's begin this section by saying that LCL pricing is based on a unit of measure known as a cubic meter, a CBM. We've mentioned CBMs a bunch of times. It's really important from that unit of measure perspective, especially when we start looking at weight versus measure, or that actual versus volume cargo calculation we'll be doing in an upcoming section. Clearly, a cubic meter is a measure of space. That is for certain. But in LCL, we express charges on a per CBM basis. But let's be clear. First sub-bullet point, that 1 cubic meter equals 1,000 kilos. And when we say that, we mean it equals in the sense that if a shipment measures exactly 1 cubic meter and weighs exactly 1,000 kilos, that shipment is neither dense nor voluminous. It's in a point of equilibrium. So a cubic meter is about space. Kilos is about weight. CBM, the expression CBM, provides us with a unit of measure that when multiplied by the LCL charge, weight or measure as it's called, gives us a simple answer. We'll talk more about that in upcoming slides. As a brief aside, just to remind ourselves, 1,000 kilos is the equivalent of 1 metric ton, or the equivalent of 2,204.62 pounds. As we read in the supply chain perspective we looked at it during the last slide of our prior section, LCL pricing is expressed using the term weight or measure. That is a specific ocean term for LCL cargo. If you see the term weight or measure, or W/M in uppercase letters, that's automatic about being applied to LCL cargo. We see in our sub-bullet that this idea is very similar to the principle of actual versus chargeable weight for air freight. And to summarize, it can be expressed as W/M uppercase letters. But to summarize this slide, to avoid any confusion, a cubic meter is about space. Kilos is about weight. Our goal when dealing with LCL pricing is to find out whether cargo is voluminous or dense. Either way, it can be expressed as a CBM because that is the unit of measure for LCL cargo. As we said, weight or measure is based on 1,000 kilos being equal to 1 cubic meter of cargo, where we have the ideal shipment that is neither voluminous or dense cargo because the shipment weighs exactly 1,000 kilos and takes up exactly 1 cubic meter, a point of equilibrium between actual weight and volume weight. Summarizing in our sub-bullet points, the weight component, that's 1,000 kilos, also known as 1 metric ton. Measure equals that 1 cubic meter. Some basic math allows shippers to determine if they will be charged weight or measure, whichever is greater. This is the deal with LCL cargo. Whichever calculation comes out greater, the actual weight or the volume weight, expressed in cubic meters, whichever is greater, that is the amount upon which charges will be levied. As such, and we'll say this as a trade tip, U.S. importers should ascertain any weight or measure charges in advance in order to properly account for transportation-related expenses. This is a good example of how LCL cargo can impact landed cost. Of course it can. If we're an importer and we use a lot of LCL cargo and we're not sure if our cargo is dense or voluminous, we might get ourselves in a little bit of trouble from an accounting perspective because we won't be sure what the charges are going to be. The moral of the story on this trade tip is, as an importer, we have to know at an item level if the goods that we're importing is dense cargo or voluminous cargo. We're going to learn how to do that in an upcoming section. Let's move on to some of the charges that may be levied on an LCL import shipment. And let's begin by saying that these charges can vary from port to port, from forwarder to forwarder, from country to country. What we're saying here, this is a portfolio of charges that can possibly be applied to an LCL shipment. Let's begin by saying that who pays for these charges is a function of what the Incoterms rule between the supplier overseas and the buyer, the importer, in the United States. Many importers choose Incoterms like free carrier, like free on board, so they can control the inbound charges and negotiate those charges with the steamship lines and or the freight forwarders. That's a strategic decision outside the scope of this module, but a very important consideration that importers have to agree upon with their overseas vendors way before any type of cargo moves, never mind just LCL. With that said, let's run through these charges. Of course, inland freight to the origin LCL facility, the CFS, the container freight station, from the factory outside of Seoul, Korea, to a port facility, typically a freight forwarder's warehouse, a CFS, a consolidator's warehouse. There could be some in and out fees at the CFS, meaning a charge to receive the cargo in, put it in the container, and move it back out again. Container stuffing charge, levied on a per cubic meter basis, weight or measure, of course. Any origin storage fees. It's not entirely out of the question for a vendor to move goods into an LCL facility and have them sit there for a week or two. Maybe the vendor missed the sailing and it has to sit for a week or even longer. There could be some storage charges for that. These CFS facilities are not set up for long-term storage, so the charges could be higher to motivate vendors and importers, for that matter, to get goods moving. Naturally, the main mode of transport, which is ocean freight, on a per CBM basis, 2 cubic meters, 10 cubic meters, maybe it's dense, maybe it's voluminous, it's going to be expressed by CBM. Other charges. Documentation fees. Of course, the freight forwarders are going to prepare the house ocean bill of lading. There's a charge for that, quite common. Automated manifest filing. This is an electronic filing that has to be done to notify U.S. Customs and Border Protection of inbound, incoming goods. Could be a charge for that. Very likely that there will be a charge for that. Importer security filing 10+2. That's a post 9/11 maritime supply chain security requirement. It is U.S. law. Every importer in the United States, either directly or through a freight forwarder or customs broker, has to notify U.S. Customs and Border Protection about a shipment coming in 24 hours prior to a container being loaded on board a ship. There's a charge for that too. Container stripping at destination. The destination CFS in Baltimore, in Jacksonville, in wherever, could very likely have some container stripping fees. And then a little bit of a nebulous charge here, oftentimes questioned, a destination handling charge. Not unusual to see that either. Some others. And we're getting down to the bottom of the list here. Destination demurrage and destination detention fees. We talked about demurrage and detention. It applies to both FCL and LCL containers. But demurrage are late fees when a container isn't picked up in a timely fashion from a terminal. There could be destination detention fees too. We talked about this under FCL, where a container isn't returned in a timely fashion. A little more unusual, to be honest, in an LCL environment, because the consolidator or the deconsolidator in the United States is going to want to get that container back to the steamship line quickly. But it could happen. Naturally, customs clearance on a per ocean bill of lading basis, and then local delivery. As a trade tip, for LCL cargo, many of the above charges are bundled into a single per cubic meter fee. So if a fee is $100 weight or measure per cubic meter, some, not all, but some of these charges are going to be put all together. So there isn't a huge laundry list of charges for an LCL shipment. What we're going to say in just one second is be careful about the real definition of the word bundled. In this supply chain perspective, we're going to elaborate on the point about extra charges with the title, Beware Ancillary LCL Charges. Ancillary just being a fancy way of saying extra charges. While it is indeed true that LCL consolidators bundle charges into a single per cubic meter fee, for example, $100 weight or measure, an importer must be aware of any ancillary fees that are outside of the bundled charge. It should be noted that this awareness must be applied to origin fees for sure, but in particular at destination, in our instance, here in the United States. The types of fees that are levied can vary by origin and destination port, as well as service provider. They're kind of all over the place, to be honest. However, when dealing with LCL freight, The one practice that is universal is that of prorating charges. Specifically, because shippers share space in an LCL container, fees will be levied by the amount of space or weight they occupy in the container. The same idea of the weight or measure charge. You're charged for what you occupy, space or weight. An example of the above could be a chassis usage fee at destination. If the fee is $50 and there are 5 shippers in a groupage box, all occupying equal space, that's not likely to happen, but this is for ease of calculation, then each would be charged $10. That's a prorated fee. Other types of ancillary charges that importers should be aware of include destination handling charge. We jokingly alluded to that just a moment ago. Terminal surcharges, a facility window surcharge. Goodness knows what that even is, but it probably has something to do with a trucker going to the window to pick up a container at a terminal or drop it off at a CFS, and a clean truck fee, which, depending on the port, can be levied. That will wrap up this section. When we come back, that all-famous weight or measure calculation for LCL. This is going to be a good one. Please do come back soon.